I'm Coach Seb, and this is Running New Mexico. All right, joining me today, I have Kevin Brennan. He's a CPA, had a Santa Fe runner, and put together the High Desert Dirt blog, which, if you haven't run across it, looking at former runners in the state, it is it's something I've used a lot when I've looked up people to interview and finding some research on things, and so I'm glad to finally get you on here and talk about this, Kevin.
Yeah, it's nice to be on. I uh, I like your podcast a lot. Obviously, New Mexico running, and I'd never really thought I would have anything interesting to say, but here we are. And it's very nice to hear that you've read some of the things I've written. It's always kind of a fun thing to hear people say, "Oh yeah, I read something you wrote." You don't think about that when you're. It's an odd thing. You don't think about it when you're writing it. That you might run into someone you've never met before, and they'll say, "Oh yeah." So yeah, and God, it's so cool to listen to interviews that you've had with people that I've written about that I've never met, and I would think. Uh, it's great to hear them sort of talk about some of the things they've done as opposed to I guess just
I
imagining it.
Yeah, and I had a blast, looking through your blog, you know, and finding, some of these people. Some of them I you had known about for a long time, or my dad had told me stories, or I'd found through this and that, and then coming across your blog and finding these different aspects of it that I hadn't seen before, which was just like, oh wow, they did that too, or I didn't know they transitioned into trail running at this point, and all these different things that you had kind of compiled at the time, which was just not only fascinating to me but so helpful.
I don't. We were speaking about this, but I don't remember. Some of these things I've written now. It's been 7, 8, 9 years, and at the time, I just had a really strong interest in a couple of these old runners, and yeah, and I would fish around on the internet and you run across something or you run across an interview of somebody talking about that runner and somehow I just compiled it, and for some reason it made sense to me to to centralize it and just put all the information, and I think I put some of the link to the helpful links in there, and I think it was really just like an internet bookmark. I thought this person's fascinating. It's like almost like a Wikipedia entry or something like that. And it was like, here you go, and I just type it out. Maybe I even, in some cases, did it for myself, and then I don't know. I was just sort of collecting this information. I don't know. It's an odd thing, but
Well, I
yeah. But
feel very like we had the same idea, that collection of stories and things that happened here, and kind of preserving it, in a sense. And so it was really cool for me seeing someone who had, like, I have this idea. I'm like, oh man, like, why hasn't this been done before? And then I go through and research, and like, oh, someone did start doing this before. Slightly different format, but it's there.
yeah, and I don't know why it was important to me. I think I just sort of admired some of these people, and I just thought, well, no one else is going to do this. So I'll just do it. Just spend 5 minutes. Of course, it wasn't 5 minutes. I'd spend several hours. But maybe not in one go, though. So it'd be 20, 30 minutes here, 20, 30 minutes there. I don't know. It was enjoyable. It's an odd thing, but it was satisfying to do it. Uh, the only runner I ever really ran across was Tony Sandoval. I saw him once at La Luz, at the La Luz Trail Run, which was that was such a fun run, and it was just such like you'd recognize all kinds of great runners there, or uh, coaches, or sometimes you'd see like the strong high school kid for that year. Discontinued race, which is really sad. That's like a whole nother topic. But so they stopped running it in 2019. The Forest Service was really getting ornery for some reason about granting the permit because technically it runs through the wilderness. Oh, so that's a whole nother story. But so I saw Tony there once because he was running with his kids. And of course, I spotted him right away. And I was like, oh my God, it's Tony Sandoval. And I overheard him, and it was the funniest thing because he was talking to a friend, and he says, yeah, I was trying to get my kids out here to run La Luz, and he says, I told him it's a piece of cake. It's an easy run. He says the only time I've ever run it, I set the record. He says I told him that, and I thought, yeah, that's right. He did when he ran it like in '76. He won it, set the record. And I thought that's hilarious. But I didn't have the guts to like say hi to him or strike up a conversation. It would have been a very like nerd, uh, very nerdy thing. Like I'm a fan of your accomplishments. So I didn't bother. Very funny to overhear him talk to people like that.
I think after talking to so many runners, I think there definitely is some of them that would feel obviously a little um, like, oh, or that was a long time ago maybe, or maybe a little embarrassed, but a lot of them really, I think it's they downplay what they did, but I think they recognize the fans that they have within the state, maybe even outside the state, of their accomplishments. Because again, I think for a lot of us kind of growing up here and hearing these stories, or knowing somewhat of these people, and knowing like, oh wow, I could be like Tony Sandoval, right? Like, just because I come from New
Yeah,
Mexico doesn't mean I can't go and win.
yeah. I know. God, Tony was on top. Uh, anyway, his story is pretty interesting, and then of course, watching his kids come up and watching his kids just, I feel like they're all graduated now, but watching them just dominate these other kids, and I don't know how much self awareness sort of high school kids have, but I'm sure all the coaches were like, oh my God, that's Tony Sandoval's kid. There's like no chance our kids have, maybe they can, our strongest kid can knock him off, and then they wouldn't even realize that. But I'm sure the coaches talked about it like, oh my God.
Absolutely, I think that the coaches are definitely a little bit more self-aware, and sometimes the kids are um, trying to run away from that legacy, and
Yeah,
it's try not to keep that burden.
yeah, yeah.
So let's go back to the beginning. What year did you start the blog?
Oh gosh, I actually don't know. And when I started talking to you a week or two ago, I thought I should probably go back and take a look at some of this stuff. And I did, but I want to say 2010 would be my guess. So 12 years ago. And I feel like maybe I stopped writing to it 4 or 5 years ago. If I can't quite remember. Yeah.
Yeah, when I looked it up, it was 2010. Was kind of your start year, and then 2019 November-ish was kind of your last entry.
When was the last entry?
2019 in
Okay.
November.
All right. So I could jump back in there. 'Cause I do still sometimes think I'm like, oh,
Yeah,
I should go. This is a good story. I should write this down, but I'm not as
I think
anymore. I just forget. Something else comes up, and then I just forget. And then a couple weeks later, I'm like, oh, that's a good story. I should write that down.
I mean, nearly 10. I mean, that was November. So if you would have had just one in 2020, that would have been a 10-year 10-year run of posting things, which is, I mean, that's a lot of work.
Yeah, I was actually trying to think. I thought, well, I wonder how much I wrote. Couldn't have been much more than about 100. But there was a few years there where it was over 100 for one year. But I was experimenting with a lot of things. because I didn't quite know, I didn't have a very concrete idea of what I was doing. And so sometimes I would just I think I would just post pictures like, I was out on this trail today. Look at this. This is beautiful. I wouldn't write a whole lot about it. And then sometimes I'd write about something specific, and I would spend hours writing like about, I think I wrote something about like the names of the arroyos, because at one point I was like, these arroyos must have names, and I got really into figuring out what the names of the. But anyway, and I spent hours and hours doing it. It was a lot of fun, and then like putting together maps. Then Strava didn't exist then, so I can't quite remember like how I came up with these maps, and you get like lost. You go into these like little wormholes, and at some point I was like teaching myself like HTML code because I wanted to something that I was putting on the page. I wanted to look like this one way. I couldn't get it to go, and so I was like, all right, I'm just gonna go into the back end of this thing and like code it. And so I was doing some like odd stuff like that, and oh yeah, no, it was with like lists and stuff. Anyway, it was pretty. It was kind of like a fun adventure, but I didn't really know what I was trying to do. So, so
Well, it is like it's cool looking. Yeah, looking back at some of them, like again, you've got these stories of these runners, and then you jump to these trails, and then you've got some of your running adventures or hiking adventures, and then you've got like I think one of the last ones you did was like a ghost story thing for Halloween or something. Like
oh yeah,
it kind of jumped a little bit, but at the same time, like um, I think sometimes we can get too focused on a certain thing. Like I think that's good to help guide, but I think sometimes maybe that helped you kind of keep it going for as long as you did, to be able to just kind of like, well, this is what I'm interested in, this month or whatever.
yeah. I liked doing the Halloween stories. I think that's just a thing that I do when Halloween comes around. I like to go out specifically and get creepy movies because it's Halloween and we're going to watch these creepy movies. And I would write about it. I'd hear. I think I found a couple really good Halloween stories, and so I'd mark that each year. And it was just kind of a fun thing to, I guess, mark the time. Great time to run. The fall, of course, is a fantastic time to run. Uh,
Absolutely.
I was a big cross country runner. I just really enjoyed it, and when fall comes around, I guess college football and other things, but I'm always like, it's cross country season. Like, check out the paper on Sundays. Like, I like to see if I went to school at Santa Fe High, and uh, back in the day, wow, they were sort of like a dynasty team. When we were there, we had a few strong runners. But anyway, so to this day, they're not a great team. Team. Maybe I guess I can't speak for who's running on the team right now. But sometimes I'll check the paper and I'm like, come on, let's see like how the demons are doing. Usually not great, but I'll be like, oh yeah, look at Penasco, look at Penasco or Pecos. So those guys are really cleaning up. This is great.
Right. Well, and I mean, I grew up in Las Vegas, New Mexico, and so we'd come down to Santa Fe and we'd run at Santa Fe High, and oh
Uh-huh.
man, there was a course that I just absolutely. It was one of the toughest courses, but I loved it because it kind of started on the soccer field, and then you ran out and took this corner into like, now it's all houses, but at the time there was nothing there. There was just a trail, and you were kind of out behind the school and just running on this trail, and then it kind of turned into a single track for a little while, and then you got dumped in, jumped into the arroyo and ran in that for a while, and it just was a, a good northern New Mexico course.
Yeah, yeah. I I should take a step back. I don't run much any longer, but I ran track in junior high. I enjoyed it, of course, because I was good. But I also just sort of liked some of the context. I liked hanging out with some of the runners, and somehow I got into. I was running some. I had a friend that said, "Hey, come run cross country with us." It was part of. I want to say it was USATF or like some kind of junior, some kind of organized junior running. So it was, I think we were in the eighth grade, but he was saying, there's like an organized state meet and we can go to state. And if we run well, then we can go to regionals. And I thought, yeah, all right, that sounds great. What do we do? And he's just said, well, you just run 5K. And I'd never done that before, but it was a ton of fun. You go to, at least at that time, you went to state and, it's not very strong because it's only just like a few kids that even know how to sign up for this thing. And so you just have a
Yeah.
decent run and you go off to regionals. And we did. I can't quite remember where we ran regionals, but somehow we made it through to nationals and we got to go run nationals. And we had a parent that was like, oh yeah, like I'll take you out there. And we ran in Omaha, Nebraska that year.
Oh
I don't
wow.
know when it was. It must have been like 89 or 90 or something like that. But it was so awesome, man. Like I didn't know. I was just sort of thinking, wow, we're at this national meet. This will be fun. But we showed up uh, and it had snowed like 10 inches. There was just like there was like a crazy amount of snow, and then it was warm that day, so it was melting. So there was lots of snow, lots of mud, and I thought surely they're gonna like, are we gonna postpone the race? Like, what are we doing here? And the coach was like, "This is cross country. You get out there and you kick some ass." And we were just like, "Oh, this is gonna be like the coolest thing. I can't even believe they're gonna let us do this." And it was just this mud bog. And I remember like right when we started, there was this huge line with like hundreds of kids. Right when we started, this kid in the funnel next to us slips and goes down immediately in the mud, and a couple of his like teammates like run through him, and there was people wiping out everywhere. And I remember coach told us you get to the funnel where the it was like a quarter mile in, and there's a sharp turn. He says you get to the funnel and get to the turn before any of the other kids, and you'll like they'll never catch you. And we couldn't do it because there was kids wiping out everywhere, and you were running through them. It was the most fun race, and when we finished, we were covered in mud. And I remember then thinking, "This is for me. Like I love this. This is awesome." And then, of course, when you get into high school and stuff, the Royals they were great, but sometimes down in Albuquerque they'd be running on like like a golf course, and I thought,
Right.
what is this? Like, I don't like this at all. And some of the track kids would kind of punish us because they had the leg speed, and it was like, man, whatever. Like, come up to like run St. Kate's, come up and run some of the arroyos up north, and we'll see how it goes. Like, you're gonna lose. Uh, and it was so much fun. I ran track in the spring, but I always really just loved cross country. I think a little bit that transferred when I was running sort of on my own. I wasn't a collegiate runner, but so afterwards I just marathon, half marathon, trail running, ton of fun. And it's sort of the same idea. Like it's kind of fun to get lost sometimes. It's kind of fun to like every now and then you're in an arroyo and someone puts a fence up, whatever it may be, and you think, who puts this fence up in the arroyo? So you have to you're climbing fences or you're kind of ducking through trees. And it makes it a lot of fun. Track, develop your leg speed and whatnot, or maybe if you're a technician on the hurdles. Um, I love cross country. The North really lends itself to any kind, any of that stuff. And I think that's why it's the northern New Mexico develops some really strong runners. Matt Gonzalez. I know you interviewed Matt, but
Yeah.
he was Santa Fe High, so I got it was
Yep.
really cool to hear him. And we had some other really good champion runners, and of course the teams in the '80s. I don't. I'm trying to think about Robert. Wait, were you at Robertson or were you at? Yeah,
I was at Robertson. Yeah.
yeah. I remember there was some tough runners. I can't think of like really intimidating champion type guys. I'm sure there were several, but
There was the Chavez brothers back in the day, back in my dad's day, or just before him actually.
yeah,
Um,
just dominating.
and yeah, they were good. Well, one of them, I think. Well, now I'm forgetting, and my dad's gonna listen to this and call me because I can't remember if it was. I feel like it was the Chavez brother, but it might have been one of the Seguras who ran for Eastern New Mexico when they had won their national championship back
Okay,
in the day. I think is that the 70s? Yeah. So there's been a few, and that I mean, there's been some more, since then. But there's been so many great runners coming throughout the state. It's hard to focus in, just on one school sometimes, and unless you're talking about some of those dynasties
Yeah.
of some of those places.
You ran. Did you run against some of those Gallup teams in the '90s? Those
I
dudes
did.
were scary. They were so good. And you just see them coming rolling in their orange jerseys and their orange vests, and it was like, oh man. I remember we would talk about, I mean, we would talk out loud, and we weren't embarrassed about saying things like, "Oh yeah, I picked off, I broke up the Gallup. I got in front of their seventh runner," and people would be like, "Oh, good work, man, good work." And looking back, it's like,
Yeah.
I can't believe we were talking about that out loud. That's humiliating. But it was like, no, man.
Right.
Like you pick off the seventh runner, or sometimes it was the sixth. You get in front of the sixth runner, and you wouldn't even score on that team. But it's like, yeah, but I got the last two. God, they were
Right.
good.
They were so good, and I had, and I remember, and I still, um, I run into him now and talk to him. And in fact, we've talked about getting him on the podcast. But Brandon Leslie,
Oh
from that
yeah,
time, he was a little bit older than me, but he just, I
yeah,
mean, just a beast. Just, I mean, my dad would tell me these stories of these people, like, like Anthony Sandoval and Tony Sandoval and these Chavez brothers and Scuda, all these people that I
yeah,
grew up kind of hearing about. But then I'm seeing this guy who's a couple of years older than me, and Brandon Leslie, who's out there like just crushing everybody, just absolutely killing the competition.
yeah. No, he was
And
good.
then his teammates weren't that.
They were in our
Yeah, his
district.
teammates.
Gallup was in our district. You couldn't get through them. It was crazy. They were so good. Like our teams, we didn't have a strong enough drive to go to state. And so if you wanted to run state, you had to finish top 10 in the district. But like at least six or seven of the spots were locked up from Gallup.
Yeah,
So it was like, okay, you'd look around at like the other number ones at like on a couple of the other teams. So it was like Espanola. We didn't know anything about Farmington because they were too far away. It was like
right.
Espanola and like Sandia, I think. Wait, who do you coach? I've forgotten.
I'm at Sandia. Yeah,
Yeah, so Sandias, and there was I think, but anyway, and it was like you look around at the number ones, and you're like, oh man, like I gotta beat a couple of those guys, or that's it, because I'm not getting through Gallup, and yeah, God, they were like this mythical team. I actually would like to hear if you ever get to talk to Brandon, you got to ask him questions about the coach. I think it was like Coach Williams, because that
yeah.
that
So
was the guy that was like the glue. Um, Actually, I think Brandon kind of, I think him and Coach Williams kind of had a falling out his senior year. Did he not? Didn't he like not run like state his senior year or something? He was like too good. He was just like, he like became bored. He was such a good runner. Um, but I can remember. So this was actually a pretty cool story. So when I started running cross country freshman year, coach and a couple of the older athletes were talking about this Gallup runner who nobody could touch, and his name was oh man, I can't believe I'm blanking on this guy's name, but he was like the reigning state champ, and he was so good. Oh, Bart, was it Bart Humphreys? Anyway, and coach and the couple of the runners were like, "Oh, thank goodness Humphreys is gone. He graduated. He was gone." And they're like, oh yeah, we don't have to deal with Bart Humphreys. And you'd hear some of these other runners talk about, oh God, thank God, like we don't have to see Bart Humphreys. And we showed up the first time we raced Gallup, and this young little dude that nobody knew killed everybody. And it was like, who the hell is that? Who's this guy? And it's like, oh, he's just a freshman. His name's Brandon Leslie. And it was like, well, Bart Humphreys that good? Because that was kind of crazy. And they were like, "Yeah, Bart was that good, but it looks like they have like basically another Bart." And he was like, "Well, that's no good. He's a freshman. Like he's just gonna pretty much kill us." And he did. He just killed us. I can remember one race. I think it was that same race. We got to like the half mile mark, and I was sort of marking a few of the guys that were ahead. I was pretty far back. I was like maybe in like 15th, 16th place. And then we came around this bend, and I saw there was an orange vest way out. We were like at the half mile mark. This guy had 100 meters on us, and I was like, that can't be right. That's like impossible. It wasn't impossible. It was Brandon Leslie. He killed us. Um, and the only time I saw him where he looked mortal was like the following year. I think his sophomore year. Um, who was the big runner out of Cruces? Krummenacker was the big track runner, but he didn't run cross
Yeah,
country. Ran
Krummenacker.
cross.
Yeah,
His senior year, he came out and he ran cross because I think he was trying to get a scholarship. And him and Leslie duked it out at the state meet. And it was like a race within a race. It was like those two guys and everybody else. And it was awesome because Krummenacker he was like Leslie's equal. I mean, Krummenacker, you saw him, and you're like, yeah, that guy's gonna kill people in college. He was so good. And anyway, that was the one time where Leslie like was struggling. Every other time, he's just out on his own, just killing people. It was fascinating to watch that.
I
And the other guys on the team were
that's
really good, but they just weren't like
right.
that good. It was amazing. Not as fun to watch on the track. I don't know. I kind of enjoyed watching him cross country, but yeah, that's the story, man. Bart Humphreys. Everybody feared Bart Humphreys, and then Bart was gone, and bam, this new dude showed up, and it
Well,
was
and I've heard
fucking
so
intense.
many stories of that cross country race with Krummenacker and Leslie, and it's the thing of legend. It's just this back and forth battle that coaches who's still talk about today. And I actually got lucky, and he's another guy I got to have on. So I I started off as an assistant at Sandia, and I was the head coach was Mbarak Hussein, who is amazing, and I learned so much from him. And he had to take a leave, and so they brought back an old coach who had coached at Sandia for a little while, and it was Curtis Williams, who coached those
Yeah. Oh,
uh,
Curtis
those
Williams. Yeah,
Gallup
yeah,
teams.
yeah.
So
Amazing.
I've got his contact and everything. But yeah, he's oh man, yeah, he has stories. I'll tell you.
Yeah, I'd like to hear some of those stories. I can remember one, although I don't remember who the runner was, but he identified some really just a real natural runner at the school, and I think he asked the kid to come out, and I apologize, I can't remember the kid's name. I want to say it was probably in the 80s though, and the story was he asked the kid to come out to cross country, and the kid said no. He said it's too hard for me to get to school. It's too hard to get home. It was something like a hour drive from like school to wherever his family lived. And and Coach Williams set up something where he said, "You can stay with me during the week and run practice, and we'll board you. And then like on the weekends, I'll bring you home." Something like this, I think, was the story. And so the kid ran cross, and he won state. He like won all the meets. He won state, and then at the end of it all, Coach Williams drives him back to his family's property, and it was like the last time he ever saw him. He's probably still out there, with his the sheep or whatever that he was working with, and that was it. And I was like, "Wow, that's a crazy story." Just some naturally gifted
I
kid, and coach set up some kind of situation for him to compete, and then once the race was over, that's it. It's the end of the line. It's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
and he would tell stories of things like that, and it's. I won't tell his stories. I'll have to get him on and let him tell. But there's some fascinating stuff. I'll tell. He and his workouts. Oh man,
Oh
I
yeah,
mean, you got to see his teams. I've seen his teams. Anybody around our ages will, who ran in New Mexico, knows what those teams were like, and the workouts they were doing are just. We worked on some of them, and I've seen the written things, and it's otherworldly is the best way I can describe it.
yeah. Did he just have him running tons of intervals, or?
It was a little bit of everything. I mean, it was high mileage, fast, um, and he just, it's stuff that now, a lot of coaches wouldn't do. But I mean, it worked for him in that time in that place, and he got those kids to buy in and to do, I mean, amazing things.
Did he have him doing like long runs as far as like 6 miles? Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah, more longer than that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I've talked to Brandon about it. And I've talked, it's he. It was a tough program. I mean, you had to be tough to get through it for sure.
Yeah. I believe that. I think part of the like how cool those guys were was you just hear sort of like secondhand stories. Maybe they'd show up for like a race in Albuquerque and it'd be in the paper. But like without before the internet and whatnot, you just hear these like little things. Like I can remember hearing about Krummernacker and someone said, yeah, some kid down there is running like 152, 153 half miles. And we just flat out didn't believe it. We were just like, I don't think
Yeah,
that's right. I just don't think that's right. Or, uh, I guess it was a little later, but before Brandon came up, there was a really quick kid in Arizona. And someone was saying how this kid was running like 9 minute, 20-second 2 miles, and you just hear that there wouldn't be like there's no way to look it up, and you just
right,
say no, that's impossible. There's no way some kid is ripping out back to back 440 miles, no way. And then but then you'd show up and you'd see these guys and you're just like, oh my god, like these people are the real deal. And you're just like, oh my god, like I gotta raise the bar. It's too late by then, there's
right,
nothing you can do in like October, but you're like, oh, there's no chance. There's no chance with these guys. It was really cool.
right.
Um,
Well, and
yeah.
I mean, being in Santa Fe, you were close. I mean, I had Los Alamos in my district for forever, and
Okay.
they weren't quite at the same level as Gallup, but it was still like they'd show up and they'd have two full buses of just runners just
Yeah.
coming off. We barely had one bus, and
Yeah.
just the sight of all of them, and it was just you know amazing to see. And same thing, like, well, we got to get past Los
Yeah.
Alamos. And
I mean, I don't remember them being nearly as strong. Like it was like it's before the Hipwoods, maybe. Uh, yeah.
yeah, I was in the early days of, I think, right, at least for me, right around when they were kind of starting it up.
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah. It
I
was
can't think of any
it,
any runners over there in particular, but I do remember that we didn't get along well with them. We didn't really like them. I think we raced them a lot. And I remember somehow we had kind of like this confederacy with like Espanola and McCurdy, and we kind of just got along well with those guys. And we'd be out on the course, and we'd see a Los Alamos vest, like a yellow green vest, and it'd be like, man, we got to run this guy down. We can't let this Los Alamos kid beat us. And it was sort of this good target. It was this good like carrot. It's like, all right,
yeah,
this is it. We're gonna burn a match right here, and we're gonna get past this kid. And it was good. It was good to have that foil.
those I those high school cross country days. I mean, it's part of what made me want to be a coach. It just was fun, right? Like all the people that on your team, and the people that you're racing against that you don't want to beat you, but you'll go and talk to afterward and just get to know. Because like you said, I mean, when I was running was infancy of the internet. And you called people. That's basically what you did. And so, and you couldn't look up these times. And I remember the same thing. Like I'd hear these times of some of these people, and like, oh, well, that must have been a short course, or they must have been something.
Yeah,
There's no way.
yeah, yeah. I wonder what it was
uh,
like with you know. It must have been the same, I suppose, with a really talented runner like Tony Sandoval. Anyway, New Mexico, particularly the north, is really rich with long distance running. Um,
Yeah.
and so I always really liked it. Of course, I enjoyed running. I was good at it, so that lends itself to being a fan of the sport. So I moved away for a while. For school, I was up in Colorado and in Pittsburgh. So that I was lucky enough to come back to live in Santa Fe. So then I was out running again. I was spending a lot of times running in the arroyos. Um, Only until recently did Santa Fe really have any good trail systems, um, and so it was arroyos, and you'd wander around anyway. And so it was really this nice thing for myself to come to be back in New Mexico where I grew up and out running in these arroyos, and it was like it just felt really good, and even to this day, I see sort of folks out running along like the road with like busy traffic, and I always think, there's an arroyo right there. Like, what are you doing to yourself? You get in that arroyo and grind away, and it's just like aesthetically. Well, I suppose some arroyos are kind of junked out, but it's aesthetically very nice to be out like running through the arroyos. Or I suppose if you're on the edge of town, I mean, it's the same. You just running around. There's no homes. Um,
Right.
But northern New Mexico is gorgeous, and to be out in the arroyos and to be, I don't know, climbing some of those hills, there's like there's like something that you get out of it. And maybe I'm thinking back to some of those old coaches and, and grinding away, but it toughens you up. It's funny. Like I think I was listening to you talking about. Did you Was it just recently that you ran a half marathon? Was it like this spring or was it last spring?
I in January I did the Houston half marathon.
Yeah. Yeah, I enjoyed listening to you talk about your training and whatnot. And of course, you think of like yourself. But I can remember, so several years ago, I was running quite a bit. In fact, so I mean that's part of why I was writing to this blog because I was out running miles,
Right.
miles, and miles, and so it lent itself to it. Of course, I don't write to it now, and it kind of mirrors my fitness. Um, But I can remember when I was training for marathons, and you're just kind of cobbling together these odd training plans, and it would say, go out and on your on your long day, you really want to get out up to like 20, 21, 22 miles. I couldn't do
Right.
it. I couldn't do it. It was really hard. And I think, I'm out there for like 2.5, maybe longer, 2 hours, 40 minutes. And I only got together like 18, 19 miles. And I sort of figured at some point, like it's the equivalent. Like I just did 19 hilly miles at 7,000 feet. Like that, you just call that a day.
Right.
Like that works fine. And it really worked. It really translated well. And so I was doing like 19, 20, 18, 19 mile long runs. Maybe I got to 20. But you get out there and you're running like on a road at some low altitude. So you did Houston, but pretty much anywhere you go that's not Albuquerque is going to be low altitude. And it's like piece of
Yeah.
cake. It is like piece of cake. In fact, just like your turnover is almost like a little alarming because you're moving so fast and you're hitting those mile splits and you're just like, okay, like I should know this, I should be ready for this, but it freaks you out a little because you're like, we're going way too fast. And it's like, no,
Yeah. No. And
yeah, it's like, no,
it. Yeah.
at altitude, you run in arroyos and it's like, it's completely different. It's completely different. It's funny.
Yeah. And it's crazy. And then you see all these training groups, going out to working in Boulder now and eh, Flagstaff, and obviously Brooks Beasts are coming here to Albuquerque, and then going back down to sea level. But it was so crazy how good I felt being at that low altitude, and I just couldn't even like comprehend it. I wasn't looking at my watch, but they had the 5K splits, 5K, 10K, 15K, and I could do the math real quick enough in my head that I'm like, oh, okay, I'm this is where I'm at, or around where I'm at, and just thinking like, am I gonna blow up?
But so going into it, you had this idea that you were probably going to run like 6.5 minute miles, right? Wasn't
That
that
was the
pretty
hope.
cool?
That was the goal.
So did you? I mean, you did all the distance work and whatnot, but did you get a feel for 6.5 minute miles like before you actually went and did it? Were you like, man, I really need to? I don't know. Did
So I
you?
wasn't doing a whole, yeah, I wasn't doing a whole lot of like long runs at that pace. I was definitely doing some like progressive runs where I'd work down in there a bit. It was a lot of because working, I couldn't wake up early enough with school and then coaching afterward to really get like good long blocks in the morning. So I was getting 5 to 6 miles, and I would do speed work, whether it was some 800s, some Ks, some miles there, and trying to get down into that. What does 6:30 feel like? And then I'd have some other work where it
Yeah,
was shorter but at a faster pace, 6 to 6:15. That way I knew like, okay, my top end speed isn't that 6:30. So I was kind of knowing I could go faster if I needed to,
yeah,
um, and that it wasn't going to feel like necessarily out of my depth. But I averaged right around 6:30, and it just felt so, just everything that buildup was perfect. It was, I mean, the buildup wasn't perfect. The race went perfect, as perfect as it
yeah,
can.
yeah.
And that was pretty
Uh,
amazing.
had you been thinking about it for a while, for like a year or more, where you sort of like, I'd like to run a half marathon at some point, or was it something that came together pretty quick, and you just thought, there's this Houston half marathon if I give myself 2 to 3 months or something like that? Was it something that you were thinking about for quite a while, or?
It's I'd kind of had a half marathon in my head, and I kind of figured I had a little bit of speed, and so I'd done some 5Ks and 10Ks here and there, and then pandemic hit, and I I was really able. I didn't have anywhere to go, anything to do, so I was really able to like up my mileage, and I'm like I want to be ready to do something when things open up, and so then
Wow.
kind of at the end, well, 2021, I was having a conversation with some friends, and they live in Houston. They're like, "Oh yeah, we always do it, and you should do it." I'm like, "Well, maybe I will." And the timing worked out, and so it probably, I would say, May of 2021 is when I decided that I was going to do it, and just kind of started trying to string together some miles in the summer, and then spent the fall and winter adding some speed. It was, but those early morning runs, man, they were hard for a while.
Yeah. Yeah, I can sympathize. I think it's kind of cool. Sometimes it's kind of cool with like half marathons and marathons when you show up and you're sort of running alongside these people, or you see them kind of queuing up for the start and whatnot, and you can kind of you know that you're like, hey, you've been we've all been out training and doing these weird morning runs and lunch runs, and there's like this shared, I don't know what it is, I don't know if it's like shared accomplishment or like shared suffering, kind of. It's
Yeah,
like we've we've walked the same path to get to this spot. It's kind of cool. I enjoy that.
I will say that energy in those corrals waiting for everything, and you got everybody there who, like you said, they've been working towards this, and you hear people talking because a lot of them are there with a buddy or their training partner or whatever, and just the buzz of it, and it's it reminded me so much. We talk so much about kind of the old high school running it, and it just reminded me so much of that. When you're there with your teammates, and you got the other teams around you, and everybody's talking about like, okay, we're ready, and what are you gonna do? And you're chatting with the team next to you and in your box, and it's just it was a great feeling to have back, and it's something that those bigger races kind of lend themselves to more than, and I love the little local races we have here, but it's a different beast when you've got all these people you don't kind of know.
Yeah, yeah. When I traveled and I ran a couple bigger races, I really liked. I would pin like a little New Mexico Zia to my sleeve
Yeah,
because partly I wanted people to like know what's up. Like New Mexico's here,
exactly.
but and I wanted someone to like. And sometimes it was I was gonna say sometimes I'd have family there. My wife sometimes would be there. I wanted her to be able to spot me as we kind of zoom by. Um, but yeah, you're sort of like this anonymous person in those big races, and uh, you want to self-identify a little bit. It's funny.
Right.
Um, but so I was gonna say, so when you started up the podcast, your podcast, this was then well before you started sort of training. You had an interest, so it wasn't necessarily that you were like building up mileage, and then it lent itself to the podcast work. It was maybe the opposite. Like the interest in some of these interviews came first, and then the training came after.
So for me, it was very much I had been training, kind of off and on. I had done a few races here and there, but I would go out on these runs, and I was listening to podcasts for half, a lot of them, and I'd hear these runners and getting motivated, and just started,
What podcast were you listening
thinking like,
to?
well, the morning shakeout, uh, with Mario Frioli, and I'll have another podcast and with Lindsay Hine, and what's the other one? There's a couple of others. Sidious Mag off and on. They always get some good runners on,
Yeah,
and it just kind of like you. I just kind of had this feeling like, well, there's there's plenty of runners from New Mexico. Some of them are still running. Some of them have retired. I want to hear from those people that I grew up kind of hearing about, and I want to know what some of the runners now are doing. And it just kind of I sat on the idea for about a year, and then just decided, all right, let's
yeah.
let's get started. Let's see what happens.
So did you have sort of like a half dozen people that you sort of were like, okay, I feel like I could set up five or six, and then we'll just sort of see how it goes, or did you just start with like one?
I had I had I had a couple of people in mind, and I had a list, and then I was like, okay, these are the people I have access to, and I just started reaching out, and people started saying yes, and it just it,
Yeah,
it was amazing. It just went in a different direction than I not in a different direction, but it just a lot of people said yes quicker than I thought they would, and when they said yes, I was like, oh, okay, well, I guess I'm doing this. It was just, again, it was just different. Like, I had this idea, and I didn't think that I would get. I thought it would be harder to get started. I guess is my point there.
yeah, yeah. But once you kind of jump in, it just kind of, I don't know, it just starts to move forward. I I didn't know what I was doing when I was writing, and I think I told you. I mean, I never put my name on anything. I just sort of wanted it to be uh, like these trails are great. You should get out and go see them. Like I was some kind of cheerleader for getting outside
Right.
or something like that. But yeah, but once you start to move it forward, you start to kind of develop develop some kind of organization. Um, I was gonna say about some of the podcasts because I've been listening to quite a few over the last few weeks. I mean, it was great to hear. You know, you were speaking with George Young, the Olympian. You know, and he was
Oh
very
yeah,
excited to talk about. You know, that someone was asking him about some of these things. Matt Gonzalez, of course, Santa Fe guy. Um,
right.
he was really happy to. You know, he just thought it was great that someone wanted to kind of hear some of his stories. And yeah, it is very cool. You know, and I mean, so not too long ago, you've had Chase Easley on from Los Alamos, and
Yeah,
she is a world champ, man. She won last week or a couple weeks back in Portland, and I was like, holy crap! Or no, excuse me, it was Eugene, right?
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and I was like, oh man, so you got to get her back on. Did you interview her from? Did she say she was like training in England or something? Was she? Is that
In the UK, United Kingdom, yeah.
yeah? That was a great interview, and of course, I mean, were you coaching when she was competing for Los Alamos? Like, did you know
I
Chase?
No, she was before, kind of in between before I got into the coaching.
Okay,
But I had been, she was just on some of the things, and yeah,
right.
she was amazing to talk to. Just absolutely, it's so much fun.
She is badass. She was just like a complete wrecking ball in high school. I mean, you can just go read about it or whatnot, but like she had
Right.
that quote that she liked to puff up on like the throwers and be like, "Hold on a sec, I gotta go run this relay. I'll be right back." And
Right.
she was like crushing all the throwers, and then she'd go and she'd crush in the relay, and then and just throwing up like massive points for the team, just kill it, just like dominating. It was just amazing. She was crazy. I can't quite remember, but didn't she almost like run like state record? Like she was like state record fast, or her team. I think one of her relays were in a state record. Maybe that was it. But she was the real
Yeah,
deal. It was crazy.
yeah,
You know, and she
yeah. I
was
think she
talking
had a
about how she
the
just levered from softball into like javelin. She's just like, oh, I'll just be, you
yeah,
know, I'll whip this javelin. And then she just walked in, and I guess on the team, and just started killing everybody across the whole state for like multiple years. It wasn't even like a senior year thing or anything. Man, amazing.
yeah,
I was bummed out, man, because last year she was lined up to go. I was watching her. She was competing in Albuquerque at the indoor nationals, you know, and I was sort of like doing my New Mexico thing where I was like, they need to announce that this thrower is homegrown. This is our, you know, this is she grew up in Los Alamos. They didn't, but she was doing really well. And, like I wanted to like grab the mic and be like, "Excuse me, the Los Alamos thrower over
yeah,
here is about to go her put her third attempt." But she was lined up, I thought, to qualify for the Olympics. And the Olympic trials like went. I can't remember if they just went south for her. Somebody told me that she had gotten like very ill like right before the trials, and she
yeah,
didn't qualify. And I was just like, oh my god! And I just thought that was it. Like that was kind of the end of her career. No, she came all the way back and won the gold. Amazing. She's like right at
yeah,
the top of, you know, like the pantheon of New Mexico athletes. Gold medal. Crazy.
yeah,
Anyway,
yeah. That
that's a long story to for me to tell you. You got to get her back on, man. You got to ask her about some of this stuff because that's nuts. I mean, young 4-time champion, we were talking about that, and he came away with some hardware, but not gold.
yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the thing. Like, there's so many, like, having her back on would be amazing. And again, like, I mean, Tony Sandoval went out and won Olympic trials, but it was a year we didn't even send anybody. And um,
Yeah,
George Young with his 4 Olympics that he qualified for and represented the U.S., which is just insane in distance running. And it's just there's these people throughout, and we bridge the gap, and it's just it's really cool seeing where I've been able to go and who I've been able to talk to in this. And it's just I know I said it at the beginning, but I really can't downplay the role that your blog, even though you ended it several years ago, like the information on there for me to look back and look at these people and remember, and then pull this information out, like, oh yeah, I forgot about that, like has really helped me kind of narrow down some of those people and try to find, which is just, it's so useful and so fun to read. I know we talked about it beforehand, like it wasn't just a 5 minute thing that you got this idea and you wrote down. I mean, you were spending a lot a lot of time doing this, and I know that takes its toll.
Well, I'm sure you do know. Actually, we talked about this a little bit, but you were saying how maybe a few of your earlier podcasts, you were so sort of self critical, and maybe you'd get in there and you'd try and edit things, try and try
Right.
and splice it together so it maybe sounded or was presented the way that you wanted it to. And so when I was writing some of these things, particular things that I somehow was attached to, I often would have to resist this urge that like I would go back and read it several times. Like maybe I published it and I'd still go back and read it because it was fun writing it, and I'd want to edit it, and I'd want to say like, why did I use that word? Or like that doesn't read very clearly. Like think I was trying to say something, I didn't say it very well, and I'd want to get in there and I'd want to like re-edit and reformat, and it's like, no man, you got to just like let it go. Like nobody cares. Nobody, like, this is not an important thing to anybody but you. No one's gonna read it the way that like I'm reading it. But yeah, but it's
Right.
like it's kind of like this personal, because you're creating like the story, or you're creating it and you're presenting it or formatting it in a certain way, and you just like always want to like polish it or something like that. And it's a funny thing, and you're just like, no, just like leave it. Like nobody cares, man.
Well, and it's a the skills that it takes is just, kind of the willingness to put in the work. you know I I mean, it's not like you had an English degree,
No.
and yeah, and like it's good work, but I know the work that you put into it. As much as you want to nitpick yourself, like it's readable, it flows, it presents the information in an interesting way, and you know it's I don't I like you said, you didn't really have a goal, going into it, but I think, again, you got eyes on it, and eyes interested, which, if that wasn't at least partially the goal, it's I think was a good place to hit.
Yeah, I really like hearing that people read it, or that they get something out of it reading it. I'm sure that you feel that way if someone says, "Oh yeah, that great, listening
Yeah.
to that interview was fantastic." Um, and it's a funny thing because so you want to sort of see like, are people reading this, or are people consuming what I'm putting out there. I was using a Blogger platform. I have no idea if there was like some more sophisticated thing. It was just very easy to set up on Blogger, but they have a statistic. They had sort of like a hit meter or something, and so you'd view that and you try and get a sense of like, is this any good? Are people looking at this? Uh, is this as good as I think it is? And then, and you don't get a good sense, but you do get a sense of like, okay, there is some traffic like during these hours of the day, and then of course at night it goes down to zero. Oh, there's someone from England. Uh, you know, there's a hit that's coming in from like an England, and so it's kind of interesting. Sometimes you kind of looking at that, and you're like, you try and make sense of it. And I think I tried to paste in a couple like other traffic meters or something that wasn't Blogger, because I was like, I don't think this Blogger thing works very well. And I'm trying to use these other meters, and you can't make sense of it because there's so much just sort of like spam, or like web crawlers. There's just so much stuff going on. And I remember the only thing that I could get a sense of is there was some kind of statistic. I can't remember if it was Blogger or something else, but it would show if there was a hit to the site, and then there was a second hit that like linked from the first. So someone was like browsing, and I thought that is someone that is reading. Like at one point I thought maybe there's like 12 people reading this besides myself, and I remember being like pretty satisfied. I was like, hey, that's kind of cool. I bet I know a few of these people. Um, but I would never tell people that I was writing this stuff. And sometimes, like, my wife she was very proud and she would mention it sometimes. And she'd say, Kevin writes, see this blogger thing. And I'd be like, no, like, don't tell people about that. Because then they're going to, I don't know. It was, what if they didn't like it? I guess. I don't know what I was thinking, but there was satisfaction in anonymity, just putting it out there. And it's
Right.
like, it's its own thing.
That is kind of been one of the weird things for me, because I feel you. Like it's I've kind of inserted a little bit of more myself, in the last year or so of what I'm doing in my running, and you asking me these questions now too. But it's a it's an interesting. I'm not a huge like promoter and this and that, but I got the throw it up on Instagram because that's going to get eyes, and trying to share, and it's I want it to grow, and that's kind of the way to grow it. But it's so hard sometimes to do that, and so I feel you.
Yeah. It is an interesting thing though that like you get into a position. So like I'm kind of I guess I'm making assumptions for yourself, but so putting creating these interviews, creating the podcast, and putting it out there for myself. I was just writing and putting it out there, and it's just you just sort of putting something out there, and a little bit there's something in there where it's like, well, I want to like hear like I want like a little bit of feedback, um, and it just doesn't work that way. And so you just sort of have to like I don't know, come to terms with like I think this is good. Nobody else is doing this, and there's going to be someone out there running some miles that's going to come across this, and it's going to be helpful or something like that. I don't know. It's a funny thing, and you sort of like, and then it's like, well, what kind of feedback do I actually want? And I guess it's just more like write more about
Right.
this, or write less about that, or something. I don't really, but it's an odd thing, and it's very satisfying when someone says, "Oh yeah, I read that thing." Like I went to that trail that you put like a map on, and that place is great. It's like, yeah, I know. I'm glad you went out there and
That's
you read about it.
right. It's yeah, it's an interesting. It's I don't know. It's an interesting beast, and it's funny because this is something you haven't done in several years, but you like you talked about, you had some years where you're putting out a lot of content, and it's it's interesting because had I found your blog earlier, I may not be doing this because oh, somebody's already doing they're basically doing what I want to do. I didn't come across your blog until I kind of got into it and started doing this, and like, oh, someone's done some of this legwork for me. Like, that's helpful. But had I found it earlier, I might have been like, oh, this guy already did what I was thinking. We're good.
Well, I'm glad that didn't happen. I think
Yeah.
I think I remember that there was a guy here in town in Santa Fe that had started a blog, but it was really just he was just running a little bit and he wanted to put some photos up. He didn't have an idea of what he was doing either. But I remember I think I ran across that and I was like, I'm gonna do that. So it was like mine was the reverse. Like I saw somebody doing that and I thought, how hard can this be? And you just set up an account, it takes like 5 minutes, and I'm like, oh, well that's pretty easy. And then, I
Yeah.
don't know. So even 10 years ago, the internet was not. Smartphones even at that time were pretty new. Anyway, so it was sort of this not it was a novelty to it. It was kind of interesting. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, the setup is always that's the easy part, right?
yeah, I know. It's like, oh, here we go. I guess I got to write something. I'll have to go back and see what I wrote first. I think it just said I'm starting this new project or something like that.
Well, you know, I think this is a great spot to kind of wrap up. I think I could talk to you. I mean, we talked for
Yeah.
almost an hour before, kind of before we set this up. But I I hope that some people, and I'll have it linked down there. Some people go back and look at some of the things you've put out there if they haven't already. And like I said, I kind of enjoyed it. So maybe I'll be seeing some more of your stuff pop up here.
You probably inspired me to write a few things because I was out running this week too. I was like, I better get out there and run. Um,
Yeah,
have me back on like at some point, like bring me back on next year, and we'll talk about like the the pods that you put together. We'll do like a review, uh,
that would be great.
or like
I'd be totally down for that.
runs. We can go on. So it bums me out that La Luz is no longer. I almost want to like start up like a guerrilla La Luz run, but I'd like to hear like what are the big runs in the whole state? I mean, there's always sort of like
Yeah,
the marathon or like the run for the zoo, I suppose, is like the big one, but there's got to be a couple other like really like Mount Taylor 50K. That's kind of an ultra, but that's
right.
sort of like a maybe that sort of takes the place of some of this
Well,
stuff.
I will say the Albuquerque Roadrunners who had taken over the La Luz Trail. They were setting something up this year, but it was kind of a unsanctioned, I believe. Like basically, run it on your own, save your time, save your Strava maps, whatever, and then kind of they were going to compile them. I
Oh,
believe, and there's a couple of weekends that they were doing that for. I'll have to go back and look at that. Um, but yeah, they were trying to kind of get because the biggest thing was that organization of it. Even though there's so many people on that trail on a daily basis, they it was just getting the permits for an organized event with X amount of people on a specific day.
yeah. Before we
So
cut out, I want to do a quick pitch for La Luz. So, I mean, if you're a runner in New Mexico and you had maybe never made it out and didn't make the lottery entry or whatever, you got to get up and run La Luz. I mean, it's like a one of a kind. It's a lot of work, but man, that trail is fantastic. I'm sure it's fine to hike too, but
yeah, well, as Tony Sandoval said, right?
yeah, piece of cake.
Just a piece of cake.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's perfect spot. So, I'll just ask you. You said you're not doing a ton of running right now, but when you are getting ready to run, what are you listening to get you pumped, to get you out that door?
Well, I don't really listen to anything when I go run. I don't do the earbuds. I don't listen to podcasts. So nothing. No, but I listen to just a bunch of old music. I don't even know any of the new bands. I listen to the specials and Blondie and whatnot. If I want to get psyched up for running, I actually read a lot of like these old books, like the old Bill Rogers books and Joan Benoit, the Aussies, like so anything that involves like Arthur Lydiard, like the Peter Snell books and stuff.
Oh,
Those are fascinating.
yeah,
And so instead of listening to something, I'd say go find a cool old book, um, and and read about these guys. Even George Young's got a book. It's not bad. It's really hard to find in print. And even the Aussie books or the New Zealand books, they're expensive because they're like only they don't exist in like thrift stores in the U.S. They have to like be imported.
Right.
But go out and get one of
I
those.
didn't
It'd be
know.
fantastic.
I didn't know about George Young's book. I'll have to look that one up.
Yeah, yeah, it's good. It's like really hard to find.
All right. Well, crazy. Well, cool. Well, thank you again. Thank you so much for
You're
your
welcome.
time. This was like a lot of fun. And I know we're going to keep in contact, and I like your idea of bringing you back on. And yeah, is there anything else you'd like to add before I let you go?
Um, no, I didn't think through that. There's a big race in Santa Fe in October. Big Tasuke run. I guess I'll put in a pitch for Big Tasuke. It's put together, directed by the Santa Fe Striders. It's a great run. If you never come up, usually the leaves are turning right then. It's usually that first Saturday in October.
I'd once again like to thank my guest for their time, and thank you for tuning in. If you have the opportunity, please rate and review wherever you listen to your podcasts, or just help spread the word. Music was provided by Philip Friedman. You can follow him on SoundCloud at DJ Teach. You can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at RunningNM. Feel free to drop me a line or shoot me an email at runningnewmexico@gmail.com if you have any questions or know of someone who should be interviewed. In the meantime, keep running, New Mexico.